I'll stop the recording and start it again. All good. You're good to go. Thanks, Gil, for joining us today.
Thank you. Okay, I will jump in. I've got my slides ready to run. So if I share that screen and bring this one back up, we should now be ready to go. So can people see my slides, even see me perhaps, if Teams wants to be useful?
Yep. We can see your slide yourself too. Thank you.
Oh, you can see me as well. Excellent.
Yep.
So today I'm going to talk to you briefly about the importance of scoping and how you can scope a Dynamics 365 or in fact a large number of other projects for success and why that is so important. Before I jump into that, this is me. I've got now just over 20 years experience with Microsoft CRM and the various other products that have morphed out of that up to Power Platform that we know and love today. I've also got a certification or two, both Microsoft certifications and some of the others. So, first of all, jumping in, and what is scoping of a Dynamics Power Platform, CRM, even an ERP project, or quite a lot of other things? So, scoping, to put it really simply, is working out of all of the myriad of functionality that could be included in such a project. What should we include and what should we exclude? Then looking in a little more detail about what we should include, what do we do now and what do we do later? Where are the low-hanging fruit? The things that we can give, the things that enable us to give value to our users quickly. And there's a point there. When we're looking at all of this, we should be looking at it from the perspective of the user, not as a techie or as a developer. And again, under that overall umbrella of scoping, what is a minimal viable product? In other words, before we deliver this project or the first phase or the first bit of agile, whatever you want, the users are doing their jobs. And we have to assume that they're doing their jobs reasonably successfully. Whatever we deliver to them in a lump must move them forward from their current position. So looking at it from their perspective, it must be an improvement on what they are currently doing. And that is absolutely key when we're looking at all of this around scoping. Another way of thinking about scoping is within everything that I've already said, it is getting all of the key business people, the stakeholders, the key users, even the technical people onto the same page. In other words, everybody is coming at this from the same perspective and in agreement. People are looking at the future project from a bigger perspective than just their own little world. Scoping, absolutely, and without a shadow of a doubt, is the foundation of your project. That means that if you get the scoping wrong, the project as a whole is very likely, possibly even guaranteed, to go off the rails to some degree. It might go badly off the rails, it might only go a little bit off the rails. But if the foundation, i.e., the scoping, is wrong, it will go off the rails. So we really do need to stay very aware of it. Scoping is important because it underpins the building of the solution, the testing, and the training. So those three parts are obviously very, very important. And we only need to get one of those wrong, and we're looking at potentially a failed project. So therefore, it is not surprising that when the scoping goes wrong, we end up building a house that looks more like one of these than whatever you had in mind. So now moving forward a little bit, when we are doing that initial level of scoping, some things to consider, and these are particularly important to think about if you are typically not very business focused when you join a project. I've worked with projects or with people on projects who have been on a project for many months, sometimes even in excess of a year, and they do not know how their client, the organization who is directly or indirectly paying them to get a result, to deliver a result, those technical people do not know what their client does in order to earn their own money. If you've got technical people like that on a project, it is usually not good for the project because they cannot possibly make decisions about what they are doing, looking at it from the perspective of their client, if they don't know what their client does. So looking at a very high level and just comparing good CRM and bad CRM. And this can apply to any technology. Good CRM will manage the process of looking after the customers and clients in a reasonably straightforward, nicely flowing way. Now, there's a lot of things that we can look at in there. How the data is entered, how data is presented, how automation is done, and lots of other things. But the overall effect is that the user has a nice, simple, easy journey through looking after their clients, as far as the technology can do that. In contrast, bad CRM simply gets in the way. So when a user is using what I'm going to overall call bad CRM, their journey looks more like this than the top diagram. And we always want to be aiming for good CRM from the user perspective, not bad CRM. So I'm now going to look at a key part, sometimes too much of a key part of scoping, and specifically the sorry.
I think carry on, Gail. Must be someone else.
Okay. So when we are thinking about scoping, where a lot of people focus a lot and sometimes too much of their attention is on the scoping inputs and the outputs. And often there is more time given to the inputs. So I'm going to spend the next minute or so giving you a little more information about inputs and outputs. So an input is any item of data that we are feeding into a business process in order to allow it to move forward. An output is something that the business process gives to us. So inputs can be a wide range of things, and I've illustrated a few of them here. So an input may be a paper form that a client or a prospect somewhere has filled in. It may be a telephone call. It may be a meeting. It may be a website, or more specifically, a form on a website, or it could be a piece of scientific equipment. All of those and a lot more as well can collect or generate data that we can then put into a process to then help us further on. The outputs are what the process gives us, and they are the ways that we consume information from the process. Some possible outputs that it's worth thinking about when you are scoping your project are dashboards, reports, Word documents, letters, picking slips, invoices, till receipts, and many, many more. Some of those outputs may well be given to a client or somebody outside the organization. Many of them are, but not all of them. Some of them are purely internal functions and features. So I would now like to ask, which of inputs and outputs is more important? But before I give you my opinion on that, I'm going to introduce you to two of my friends. Alice asked the Cheshire Cat, who was sitting in a tree, "What road do I take?" The cat asked, "Where do you want to go?" "I don't know," Alice replied. Then said the cat, "It really doesn't matter much, does it?" Now, you might wonder why I'm branching off into well-known folk tales. This is actually very relevant to scoping, because if you don't know what you're trying to achieve, you can't possibly work out what the inputs are. And that's where I wanted to focus you, in that a lot of projects will give to whoever is doing the design or the scoping, they will give you lots of those forms, website pages, and so on. and say that's what we need. I would argue with that. That is not what you need. They are tools to get to what you really need, where what you really need is the output. So moving back to inputs and outputs, I would counsel you to think, rather of inputs and outputs, think of outputs and inputs, because it is the outputs that lead you to the necessary inputs. And then developing this model a little bit further, we get from the inputs to the outputs by the business process or processes. However, the process doesn't really sit as it appears on that diagram between the input and the output. Rather, it extends from the beginning of the input to the end of the output. However, the processes are not carved in stone. I like to think of the processes as being much more like a folk dance. And in a dance such as the one I'm showing you here, everybody is doing essentially the same thing. They're all doing the same dance. However, if we analyze it in detail, they will all be doing something slightly different. And so it will be with business processes. We might all be entering the same data, but we might go about it in a slightly different way. We might be using slightly different forms, and so on. There's lots and lots of other examples, but we don't have time to go into a huge amount of detail. What I want to get from my clients for a process is a diagram. So a simple flowchart style diagram similar to the one on the screen. And if we look at this one on the screen, what we've got is a number of actions. So I'm now highlighting one of those actions in yellow, i.e. manager approval. That is something that in this process needs to happen. We also have branches, and there again, I'm highlighting a branch. And with a branch, you've got a situation where if the answer to the question, in this case, approve, is yes, we go one way. And if the answer is no, we go another way. The map should also give us a start and a finish. In this case, we've got the start in green at the top and the finish in blue. So that is the simplest level that I would be wanting to get from users. What is even better still, particularly in a dynamics or any other line of business project, is to get something that is more like this. Now, these are very, very different processes. This is not the same process as on the previous slide. But the big difference between this style and the previous style is this gives us the roles, not individual people, but it gives us all of the roles that are involved in a particular process and what each of those roles does. So on this, we can see who does what. What does the customer do? What does the sales people do? What do the contract people do? What does legal do? What does fulfillment do? And that can be incredibly useful in a project like Dynamics 365, because that can lead directly into your business process flows that will then help users work through doing their job. When I'm talking to my users about their processes, I always make sure that I get them to tell me why. Why do they do it the way that they do it? Why do they do the process overall? One of my speaking colleagues, Steve Simpson, talks about unwritten ground rules. And unwritten ground rules are quite simply the way we do things round here. I do it this way because the person who showed me does it this way. They did it that way because they were shown that way. Is that actually the best way of doing it? Who knows? I love to illustrate the importance of why by asking a question. And the question in this, for this example, is why are railway tracks in Australia and the US 4 foot 8.5 inches wide? The reason that railways in the UK and Australia are 4 foot 8.5 inches wide is because railways in the UK are and were 4 foot 8.5 inches wide, and the same manufacturers made the early rolling stock for Australia and the US as had made the rolling stock for Britain. But why are British railway tracks 4 foot 8.5 inches wide? The reason for that is because those same manufacturers, before they started making rail rolling stock, were making horse and cart type vehicles. And those carts had their wheels 4 foot 8.5 inches apart, because like that, the wheels fitted into the ruts in the road. But why are the ruts, or why were the ruts in the road 4 foot 8.5 inches wide? The answer to that is because Roman chariots were 4 foot 8.5 inches wide. And the reason that Roman chariots were 4 foot 8.5 inches wide is because on average, that is the width, or was the width, of two horses' bums. So we now have the situation that railways in Australia in 2022 are two Roman horses' bums width apart. So when you are talking with a client and you're thinking about your reasonings, is the reason that is being given a good enough reason? Or are you designing something because it is the width of two horses' bums? Still thinking about business processes and specifically mapping, I'm now going to talk to you a little bit about 4 common mistakes that are made when mapping processes. So the first mistake is adding too much detail to the process so that you lose track of the big picture. So you get all of the nauseating fine detail, but you don't get the big picture. You don't get to see the goals. So to make sure that that doesn't happen when you're talking about processes, keep the focus on the goals, on the why of the process. Mistake number 2 is focusing on the seller rather than the buyer. So to avoid that one, when you're thinking through the process, keep your mind on the buyer. Let customer value lead the actions and decisions within the process. Keep in your mind all the time that you are focused on creating value for the customer, because after all, it is the customer, the client, who will pay, who will therefore be injecting money into the organization. And it is that money that ultimately will pay you for your efforts. Mistake number 3 is to map all the process without any metrics. Make sure that all of your process has measurable outcomes. It has numbers. So don't have a process that is about increasing profit. Refine that process. So what you're looking to do is increase profit by 10%. That gives you a definite pass fail, because if we know the profit today, we implement a process or we follow a process, is the profit at the end of that time 10% or more greater than the original one? And the final mistake is buying a ready-made process, getting a process that somebody else has developed and just thinking, oh, that one will do, looks okay, we'll do it. So what I've talked about so far is very much basis and what we need to get out of the scoping of our project in order to achieve success. I'm now going to give you some hints and tips, but it's only high level, in how do we actually get those requirements. And to me, that is the juicy bit. I like to get my requirements, my scoping of a project, in a workshop, or better still, in a series of workshops. I also only ever run a workshop with a group of people. I do not do these one-on-ones, because if you do a whole series of one-on-ones, you run the risk of getting a list of people all giving their own personal ideas, and it's left to you to work out what you do now, what you do later, what you don't do at all. And as an outsider to the client organization, as I usually am, and as the people doing this sort of work nearly always are, it is not our place to prioritize. It is our job to facilitate what the client needs. So I always bring a group together, and I leave it to the group to decide what's important. Of all the things that we could do, what's most important, what's next, what's easy, what's harder, and so on. So when I am running these workshops, what are the conversations that I choose to have? The first conversation always is more for my benefit than the participants, but it is an overview of the business. What does this business do? Who are their clients? How do they make their money? Questions like that are what I'm looking for in this conversation. I then move on to what I call the KPIs of the project. And this one is quite likely the most important of all of the conversations. This is where we get to if the project team deliver ABC, we will call this project a success. If they fail to deliver ABC, the project is not a success. I then move on and facilitate a conversation about the customer journey. So where does this organization find its clients? How does it bring them in? What does it do to move those people from the edge of their radar screen right the way through to the middle, all the way through to the point where they open their wallet and say, how much would you like? I then look at the business processes. And we've talked quite a bit already about those. And within those processes, I also focus very heavily on the outputs, because as I said earlier, the outputs control the inputs, not the other way around. I will also look at data, and within that data, the focus tends to be existing data. Sorry, is there a problem?
No,
So
all
this
good.
is Mango.
Guys, if you are not speaking,
Okay, I am now completely confused.
okay, guys, if you're not speaking, kindly stay on mute, please. Thank
Ah,
you.
okay, thank you. So in this part, this conversation, I'm focusing on other data that we will either need to bring into the solution that we're delivering, or maybe it will be other systems that we need to integrate to the solution that we're delivering. I also talk about all of the people that will touch the solution. And that is, of course, end users and customers and clients as are relevant to the solution that we're delivering. And the final conversation will be all around key dates. So looking at that client, what are the busy times of year? What are the quiet times of year? Who's going on leave? What are other date related times that we need to bear in mind when we are planning the project? So once you've had all of those 8 conversations with the right people, you are in a very strong position to then scope out fully what you are going to deliver. And then as a final point, I like to keep Einstein in mind. And I keep Einstein in mind because one of the things that he said, which is very pertinent here, is make everything as simple as possible, but not simpler. Don't fall into the trap of oversimplifying so that people actually misunderstand the questions that you're asking, what you need, what you're doing. Because if you do that, you will fail to get the scope correct, you might find that the customer signs off on something and it's not actually what they need. So yes, simplify it, but don't oversimplify it. One of the things that can help with that is strongly encouraging the key people from the client to invest in some training and education so they've got some understanding of the technology and the methodology of implementing the technology, which means that the two sides, the technical people and the business people, can move towards each other and meet in the middle. And with that, I will show one further slide, which will enable you to get in touch with me. I will leave that up for a short period of time, and then I will stop sharing and I will open it up to questions. So I've run through an awful lot of material in the last 35 minutes, and I'd now love to hear your questions. How can I help you further with this? Thank you, Mohammed. Mohammed Atif, I should say. There's several Mohammeds on the call. In fact, I feel like I'm on the wrong call. I've got the wrong name looking at the names here.
No, it has been an excellent session, Gil. So thank you very much for coming up so early there and sharing your experience. So, guys, if there is any questions, feel free to ask.
There's got to be some. Now, if this was an in-person presentation, I'd get the chocolates out and bribe you, but it's a bit hard via Teams.
Virtuals, yeah. So, Gil, one question from my side. So, when we are talking about the change management, I know it's quite intense and it's sometimes difficult to persuade end user that okay, we are going through with these changes. What is the tip from your end and from your experience that we can influence them that they take it easily and they understand it, okay, this is for their own benefit rather than that's going to make their life difficult? So what are the top tips really?
The key to that, and was it in this presentation or another one? The key is to see things very much from their perspective. So explain benefits, explain why things are being done from the perspective of the user in question that you're talking to. No end user wants something that they perceive, and this is all about perception, but perception is 9/10 of reality, that they perceive is going to make their life harder in order to give their boss or other managers something that the boss or the managers want. You've got to understand the fears, the concerns of the user and address those. And that means that the same question from 2 or 3 different people may get a very different answer. But as well as that, a key part of change management is education. One of the things that can derail a project is quite simply fear. People are scared. They might be scared that they won't be able to use the technology. They might be scared that they're going to lose their job. They might be scared of a whole range of other things. So we need to give them the education, and I'm deliberately using the word education, not training here, to allay those fears. Does that answer that question, Mohammed?
Absolutely, it does. So it's more the education, really. That's what you're saying. We need to get, yeah.
Education is
Yeah.
so important, and stay aware of the difference that training is a subset of education. So it may well be that training is not the right way to go, but education is the right way to go. So, under that umbrella of education, as well as training, obviously, we've got speaking, we've got webinars like this, we've got documents that people can read in their own time. We could make videos that explain certain points and make those available through some central repository. We could do things like lunch and learns, where come along at your lunch break, we, the organization, will shout lunch, and during that lunch we'll have a 20-minute, half an hour presentation about some aspect of the project. um, there's a good few other things you can do. Overall, my advice would be to use as many different ways as possible, because different people learn in different ways. So if we just choose, let's just take one. Let's imagine that I love lunch and learns because I love getting a free lunch on the organization. If I then deliver all of my education through lunch and learns, great for me because I love lunch and learns, but not very good for people that don't like lunch and learns, maybe who need to really concentrate. So they find the distraction of lunch annoying, or people that don't want to stay in the office at lunchtime. Maybe they need to go home and feed their kids or walk the dog, or lots and lots of reasons. But the fact remains, lunch and learns don't work for those people. So those people need one of the alternative vehicles.
Excellent. No, that's absolutely makes sense. And then the last one, Gil, from my side, how you're finding this pandemic has impacting all these change management process in the business.
It's affected it quite a lot, but in an indirect way, in that, as I'm sure everybody on the call and far more broadly, we're now doing a lot more virtually. Here's me sitting in Sydney talking to you people, and the majority of you, I'm guessing, are not in Sydney. However, what didn't happen at the beginning of the pandemic, largely because the initial lockdowns and sudden jump into virtual work happened so quickly, but many of us, perhaps even everyone, got little or no training in all of the changes that you need to do in order to work remotely from home, whatever that means. And that's both training in particular tools. Now, I suspect most employees can use Teams and other similar tools. But 2.5, 3 years ago, I think there's a decent proportion of people that wouldn't have known what they were, and they just got them thrust at them. There's a lot of other aspects of virtual work where you don't see your team members. It's been well known for a long time that what are called things like water cooler or coffee machine chats, a lot of useful information is shared between one colleague and another in water cooler conversations. You can't have those spontaneous chats when you're working from home, all your colleagues are from home, and the only connection is phone, Teams, and other things. There are approximations to them, but there is no real equivalent of the water cooler chat. So all of those have affected how we approach change management, and change management, perhaps more than almost any other aspect of work, really benefited from those informal chats, the coffee machine type chats. So when all of those are cancelled, you're a bit stuck, and you really have to find ways of replacing them and making sure that the information that normally would be shared via the coffee water cooler chats is still shared. Is that a fair answer?
Yeah, it's quite comprehensive. Thank you, Gil. All right, guys, any more question last minute left?
Maybe
If
what I
not,
will do just quickly, if we've got a minute or so left, is I will jump back into sharing that slide just briefly. And if anyone would like to connect with me on LinkedIn, I am sure you'll find a way. And if there's any questions that come out later on, there are various ways behind that QR code that you can get in touch with me.
brilliant.
Excellent. Thanks, Gil, all your time and joining us all the way from Sydney.
Thank you.
Definitely, I would really suggest everyone to do connect with Gil, because has been doing a fantastic work, and she has been moderating and sharing her experience. It's a vast experience, and it's really inspired for so many of us. So thank you so much, Gil, for joining us today. Uh, with this one, I would like to invite our next speaker. I see he is on a call. I'll stop recording.